Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the 20th Annual Town History Series at the Patent Free Library. My name is Mary Kate Kwasnick, and I am the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian in the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room here at the Patent Free Library. The library is so happy that you could join us here today for our second talk of this year's series. Before I introduce today's speakers, I have a few important bits of information to share. This year's series, in its 20th iteration, is dedicated to Peter Goodwin. Peter was a longtime history room manager, Bath Historical Society trustee, and the founder of the Town History Series. This series began in 2005, and since then, Peter worked tirelessly to build momentum year after year to bring us to where we are today. Our community looks forward to these talks every year, and it's because of Peter's dedication and that of his successors that we're here today. I also want to thank all of the historical societies and member towns for selecting our fabulous speakers and getting the word out. And today, specifically, thank you to the Woolwich Historical Society. Thank you also to the Bath Historical Society for generously offering to professionally film the series. If you're with us in person today, please note that the speakers are being filmed by a camera at the back of the room, so be mindful of that if you're passing by the camera. This recording will be available in our collection on DVD and available for checkout. And the Zoom recording of today's program will be available on YouTube as soon as next week. If you're joining us on Zoom, please note that this is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot use the chat, or so you can use the chat and Q&A feature, but you cannot unmute or turn on your camera. If you would like to enable closed captioning, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn them on. And also, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A at any time during the talk, and we'll facilitate that Q&A. If we do not answer your questions today, you're welcome to email us at history@patent.lib.me.us, and we can forward them on to our speaker. Our speakers today represent the Woolwich Historical Society. Allison Hepler is a Woolwich resident, a state representative for House District 49, a town select woman, a board member of the Patent Free Library, the Woolwich Historical Society, and Maine's first ship. In addition, Allison is a retired professor from the University of Maine, Farmington, and a published author. Amanda Montgomery Martin grew up treasure hunting for pipe stems and pottery in the mudflats of Days Ferry. She was a Woolwich wildcat and a Morse shipbuilder. After graduating from Dartmouth College, she returned to her home state to work in the yacht sales industry. She and her husband moved home to Days Ferry during the pandemic to raise their 2 children in the same wonderful community that Amanda was raised in. Amanda is on the board of the Woolwich Historical Society and the Days Ferry Mooring Association. She's the president of the Days Ferry Community Club, and she holds a commercial Maine lobstering license. We are so pleased to welcome Allison and Amanda to Patent Free Library for today's talk. Welcome.
There we go. All right. So first, I want to ask if anybody from Days Ferry or former or current resident who raised their hand. Okay, so got quite a crowd here. So welcome to home movie morning of Days Ferry in 1939 and 1956 and 1957. These are the thank you. The films of Howard Kirkpatrick at the age of 19. And what I really will see lots of, community events, lots of everyday people that you recognize, or you'll recognize their your grandparents or your great uncles and aunts. But we also, I'm really interested in filmmaking. I've never done this before because it's about what Howard chose to look at and what he chose to watch. And I also want to, Howard's son Howie is here. We're honored to have you here this morning. One of the stars of the film. And I also wanted just a big thank you to Amanda, who did all the tech on this. She's amazing. I know nothing about videos, so thank you.
Nor did I. So bear with me. There may be a couple hiccups, but thankfully I know most of you. So anyway, before you guys fall asleep, want to make sure we thank Howie Kirkpatrick. These are his father's videos, and thank you, Howie, for letting us share them with everyone. They're really a special part of history, or a special piece of history. Also want to thank Dan Wood, who's also here, for organizing the original project to preserve the videos and the notes. Tamara Lilly, she helped Dan to edit and compile the original films. Oh, sorry, thank you. Anyway, thanks, Mary Kate. Just wanted to thank Tamara Lilly, who also was supportive while I was doing this work, but she helped Dan to edit and compile the original film into a single video, which she also narrated. And then Joe Bisson and Dan Amsden, who separately also provide a great deal of tech support. So thanks to all of these guys. Here is a screenshot of the Apple Maps app showing the Kennebec River running down the center with Bath to the west and Woolwich to the east. To reach Days Ferry from Bath today, as we all know, you cross the bridge and travel north along the river until you reach the village just across from Thorn Head. But before the bridges were built, people crossed via ferries, and one of the earliest of which was between North Bath up here and Days Ferry. And the ruins of those ferries on both sides can still be seen, especially at low tide. One of the first people to hold the ferry license at this crossing was Nathaniel Day, followed by his sons. And it's for this Day family that Days Ferry is named. This map is from the 1740 Johnson map. It showed the division of land in 1740. And I've zoomed in on the area that represents Days Ferry today. I don't know if you can see, I know it's tiny print, but there's a name, Sam Harnden. And Sam came up from Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was in the militia, and he actually was stationed at Fort Richmond in the 1720s. But in 1740, he bought most of the land that is now Days Ferry, and he ran a ferry between Bath and his land. There we go. Now, I debated sharing this slide because it's a little difficult to see, but it shows a 1781 survey of Samuel Harnden's land. And I don't know if you can see, but there were only 3 buildings there, including this 1.5-story building with the chimney on the side. And this was Sam Harnden's house, supposedly built in 1742. And it's located exactly where my house is now. And legend has it that my house is built around it. That it wasn't torn down and built on, but it built around. And I think I've found evidence for this in the walls of our house, but that's a story for later. It's a long one. This slide shows the inset of a much larger map of Saginaw County made by J. Chase in 1858. You may have seen, this is a huge map. This is an inset from a huge map that you've probably seen in the courthouse. Bath Savings has one on their wall. Did you say
The boardroom here?
The boardroom here has one, but it's kind of fun to look at and see if you recognize any of the names. But you can see that more buildings have sprouted up, certainly, from 3 buildings to all of these by 1858. And a village had taken shape. Days Ferry was the major crossing from Bath to Woolwich before the Saginaw Ferry arrived. And most of these buildings are still there, all homes today. Back then they housed a tavern. This is Larry Hobel and Diana Staring's house. My parents' house in 1819 was a store. There was a store here behind the Buckins house. Sarah and Steve Griffey's house was the post office at one point. There was a tannery, a pottery shop, and even a shipyard down here. A church, a 1-room schoolhouse. Those are both still there. Blacksmith shops. But most of these houses are still there, and a couple more have sprouted up. But that's, I think, part of what makes Days Ferry so special is it's like time has stood still. This photograph is from a collection at the Woolwich Historical Society, and I believe it's from the late 1800s, maybe the early 1900s. I'm not sure if anyone does know for sure. Maybe after the presentation you can let us know. the wharf was much longer, and those timbers can still be seen today at low tide. Now the bulkhead is really only right here, but it used to extend to the north and south significantly. And here is a drone shot of the same area. Here you see the smaller bulkhead, but like I said, at low tide, and as a kid, I used to go, this is where I'd find pipe stems and pottery and whatever else the Days Ferry inhabitants tossed over into the riverbanks. This is a shot, by the way, taken by Benjamin Bisson, Rick and Lori's son. He does phenomenal drone footage. So thank you, Benjamin, for taking this shot for us to share. Anyway, the tavern is still there. The store is still there. A store that was here is gone. You know, the church is hiding up over here, but it's still fairly recognizable, I'd say, to inhabitants of the past.
So we're going to start out with a picture of the 19-year-old filmmaker, Howard Kirkpatrick. I take no responsibility for the spelling here. Anyway, this is him, 19 years old, playing with his cat. He moved here from Bath with his mother and father, Dora and Sam Kirkpatrick. And although these numbers will be very familiar to you, right? When you come up 127, this is where you enter Days Ferry. And now we're going to start a little trip up the road. We're still those many miles from those towns.
And I love this footage to see the old shotgun dents in the old sign. They've replaced it. Thanks, Dan. So as Howard travels up River Road, you'll probably recognize this curve.
There you go.
57 River Road, now Maggie Leonard's house. Is still recognizable. So originally there was a large colonial house, much older house, called the John Hathorne House. It was torn down in 1927. And the current house was floated up the Kennebec River from Georgetown. It had been built in Georgetown, and the gentleman who lived here in 1927 floated it up on 2 scows, and it passed through the Carlton Bridge, which was being built in 1927, just before the last span was set in place. So this barn is now gone, but the house, of course, is still there. The Leonards have added an addition, but the hill rising up to it is still, very recognizable, of course.
And then the next house we're coming to is 73 River Road, now lived in by Susie Donovan, also known as the old Captain Wade house. Ed Wade, like many on the road, I imagine, would stop whatever he was doing at 4 o'clock and sit there and watch the traffic come by.
BIW traffic.
Yeah. And this is a tenant.
Yeah, this is these were tenants who were or renters at the house. Harold and Susan Smith.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Just
My
moving
parents
in.
have that same wheelbarrow
Yeah,
still.
it's probably theirs, right?
Yeah.
And so moving across the street, we now come to 76 River Road, which is Valerie and Randy Doak. And who we'll see here is a woman by the name of Floaty Whittam, who has become one of my favorite people in this whole show. We'll see her
Here's Floaty.
doing her wash.
Her name was Florence.
This is something that this is something, nailing it to a tree means that a plow truck is not likely to knock it over.
Well,
We may
you
want to
never
keep
know.
that in mind. Okay, yeah. I just, yeah.
Hanging out her laundry.
Oh,
These Ferry inhabitants still do this, by the way.
is it
Maybe
Monday
not
to
so
wash
much in
day?
the winter.
So this building is no longer here, but it's part of Days Ferry's history. It's Wessex Hall. It was built by the Days Ferry Dramatic Club in 1885 and used for community events. They put on plays. The Grange also had plays. Sagadahoc Ferry also had a drama club. I think we should bring some of these things back. Dances, masquerades, picnics, parties, even a town fair, like a town agricultural fair for a couple days, and at least one horse race between 5 women in 1917. I don't know who won.
Let's bring it
But
back,
we could
girls.
bring that one back too, right? So, and I think next up is
Yeah.
the sign, the poster.
Wow. So this is this old poster, which our neighbors Steve and Gladys DeWitt have framed in their home, advertises an event at Tuesek Hall. And Steve and Gladys, if you're watching, I hope it's okay that I snuck a picture of this. My kids cat sit for them when they take off on their fly fishing trips. And I was so intrigued by this, but and if you'll humor me, I'll read the poster because the old time is probably hard for you to read, and the old time language is pretty fun. Anyways, an old folks concert will take place at Tuesek Hall, Days Ferry, Wednesday evening, August 19th, 1885. So it had just been built, it's pretty early. Ye following is ye record of ye diversion contemplated. At 8 o'clock of ye twilight, all conversation and hilarity will cease, and ye company will listen to ye fiddlers tune their fiddles, and ye singers get their pitch. And it is hoped ye young people will not indulge in unbecoming levity on ye occasion. Ye singers will all be arrayed in ye goodly garments of ancient times. An orchestra of 10 accomplished fiddlers and players on newfangled instruments from Bath and Bodenham, under ye skillful management of Brother Coombs, have kindly volunteered for ye occasion. At ye close of ye musical performances, ye company will be invited to partake of some baked beans, brown bread, gingerbread, lection cake, which I had to Google, it's election cake, which was a bundt cake with dried fruits and spices.
Only served on election day.
Maybe only, yeah, made on election day. Pie.
You're right.
Pie, and then biled donuts. I think they meant boiled donuts. I hope they meant boiled donuts. And coffee, etc., which ye fair ladies of Woolwich have provided, and of which it is expected you will buy as much as your purse and your conscience will permit. After ye supper, ye young people and such of ye older ones as feel inclined will join in a social dance for a brief period, for which a small fee will be charged. Ye big doors of ye hall will be swung open at 7 o'clock. Ye grown-up folks will go in for 25 cents, youngsters 10 cents. Should ye weather be foul, ye entertainment will be put by to ye first fair night. And this is cool. I didn't realize that we had steamers come to Days Ferry, but apparently the steamer Wilwerna will leave City Wharf in Bath at 6:40 p.m., Knox and Lincoln Railroad Wharf in Woolwich at 6:50 standard time. Returning, leave Days Ferry at 11 p.m., fare for round trip 25 cents, including admission to the hall 50 cents. So people are coming from Bath to the bustling hub of Days Ferry. You guys have it going on now, but we did then, which is pretty cool.
Where was the hall?
Right.
Was the land?
So as you come around Randy Doak's corner,
Yeah.
just past through the Donovans, just on the right, and I'll show you what it looks like right now. So it was dismantled in 1959, and much of the lumber was used by Gordon Fault to build the L of his house, which is now the Forester's home, and they're here. I think they probably know it well. And as you can see, if you poke around in the woods, which you may have seen me doing, the cement foot and brick footings are still there.
And then sort of looking from there across the field, and that's actually Old Stage Road, and we'll come back to that in later detail. That's the church. Greg and Susan Doak's,
All
yeah.
grown up, it's all
Yeah,
trees now.
Greg and Susan Doak's house and the parsonage that was associated with the
Yeah.
church. That little house, the parsonage burned in 1941. A message to you all: don't leave ashes on your porch.
Your bucket of ashes.
Yes.
Yes.
And so like I said, we'll come back to that in
more
a bit.
detailed
It's
stuff.
just more trees. Now we're moving back onto River Road. This is 121 River Road, which is Paul and Roxanne Althouse, who are here. And in the 30s owned by the Pittman family. And who we'll see in a minute is Freddie Pittman. I don't know why this 1939 film is in color, but it matches his age, so we know it's him. Paying attention. I don't know anything about outboard motors, but that may be something of interest to you. But you can see a good shot of the river up into the narrows. You can also maybe notice that he doesn't have a life jacket. And a little bit of history in him. He became a ball turret gunner in World War II.
On B-17 bombers. So he's on the, if they had an emergency landing, you're getting crunched. It's very dangerous position.
His brother David was killed in action after the war. Freddie became a chemist, and we'll come back to the Pittmans in the 1950s.
You
Love
see
that.
Jack and Susan's point in the back.
And we'll also come back to that buoy, number 6. We will also be back to that one. This is,
Still the outhouses.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, that's right. I can look here. All right. Across the river is Rick and Lori Bisson's house, then owned by Gertrude Trott. And they're also here. And this one is called Kennebec Lodge. It was owned by or lived in by the Mayberries, is now gone. It's now the field where the Bissons hold their 4th of July fireworks and picnic and whatnot. And this is the Mayberries feeding ducks along the river and other sorts of wildlife. It was a real farming community, as you'll see in a minute. I think, aren't there?
We still have lots of
Yeah,
ducks.
Yeah.
And chickens, which we'll see in a minute.
Yeah.
There we go.
This is what they did for activity. Oh, yeah. I know. I wonder what's being carried. Yes.
So we hold them a little more nicely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know what the end of this one is going to be.
So this is 127 River Road, which is now Richard and Betsy Bisson's house. And in 1939, it belonged to Jesse Maines. It was a brick house built for Captain Aaron Delano around 1825, and you can see it was painted white. 129 River Road was the Kirkpatrick's house, where Howard lived with his parents, Dora and Sam. Now it's Charlotte Kirkpatrick's house. Howard was a clerk at the family business Bath Fuel Company, which we all know about, and his father was the president.
We'll hear more about Dora.
Looking up the hill, you can see the intersection with Old Stage Road. And the Forester's house is here on the right. It's 135 River Road, and in 1939, Suzelle Howard lived there. It was known as the Old Samuel Brookings house. Over here is 142 River Road, now Ken and Nancy Martin's house. Ken says it was built in 1819 by Peleg Delano, who left his name and the date painted everywhere, apparently, but especially behind the stairwell. Peleg was a sailor and a ferryman, and later it belonged to Howard Corliss, who was the son of Potter John Corliss. And in 1939, the Corliss daughters were living there.
And coming down alongside the Martins is Lester Holbrook, Evan Holbrook's grandfather, who was 31. He's driving it. He's in the front. Was 31 at the time. His father, Edwin Holbrook, was standing behind him, who was 71 at the time. The guy on the high up here.
Drive a little faster now. So this is 137 River Road, Jane Carter's house now. Excuse me. It was built by Captain Samuel Reed II around 1828, and E.L. Carter bought it from Samuel's son in 1867. It has been in the Carter family ever since then. In 1939, it was the home of Mason and Doris Carter. Mason was a marine contractor and built most of the docks and the footbridge in Boothbay Harbor. In fact, if you go to Boothbay, there you may have seen there's a plaque in his honor at that footbridge. Their youngest son, Jim Carter, bought the house just before retiring, and his wife, Jane, still lives there with their daughter, Lori. And here is 147 River Road. It's Erica DeRamo and Matt Skinner's house now. And many of you know David and Annie Miller, who are here today. They owned this house for a time and renovated it wonderfully. In 1939, it was Marcia Stinson's house. She was born up the road at 647 River Road, now Don and Bernice Knight's house. And she bought this house when her father was too old to operate the family farm. Marcia taught school in Portland and spent summers with her parents in Days Ferry, finally living there full-time when she retired. Captain Webb bought the house in 1832, and it became known as the Webb House. And here's Captain Lincoln Webb. He was a shipbuilder and president of Bath Bank, and he was a pretty serious looking guy. Next at the intersection is 15 Old Stage Road, now my neighbor Ryan Anderson's house. And Ryan's here today. Thanks for coming, Ryan. It was built in 1821 by housewright Robert Hanson Jr. It was Sam Buck's house in 1939. Sam Buck was a blacksmith. And he was living in this house with his wife, his sister-in-law, and his cousin. They were all in their late 60s. Recent owners have also been Ann Pearson, Mary Nevin, and Frances King. And I lived there when I first came back to Woolwich during the pandemic, and lived there for about 3 years with my little family before we moved across the road.
She's basically moving, her goal is to live in every house in Days Ferry. So watch out, yes. So, yeah.
I'm up to 3 now. We'll
Yes.
see what we can do. So across the intersection, down the road to the old ferry landing is 6 Old Stage Road. This is the house that I grew up in. It's now it is still my parents, Bruce and Nancy Montgomery's house. They've been there for about 50 years. It was built in 1819 as a store by Captain Samuel Reed II. And in 1939, it was Carl and Charlotte Longfellow's house. Charlotte was a granddaughter of the local potter, John Corliss. And Carl had been an electrician and then a foreman for New England Telephone. They retired to Days Ferry from Worcester, Mass. When my parents bought this house from Mr. Longfellow, who was a widower then, they found all kinds of Corliss pottery in the attic. And I think there's a lot of Corliss pottery in many of the attics in Days Ferry. And there's Charlotte coming up to sweep the front steps. Next down the road and right next to the landing, the ferry landing, is 2 Old Stage Road. It's now Larry Hobel and Diana Staring's house. We think built or maybe around 1809, this was a tavern run by Robert White and later Gould Hathorne. In 1939, Philip and Clara Wenz lived there, and Philip was a marine engineer at the shipyard. This is looking across at the Narrows.
And this is across the street now from the Montgomery's house. There was a store, you can see there, that was Twing's store. That's no longer there. In fact, it was there, and it was also a post office for
West
some number of
Woolwich.
years, West Woolwich Post Office. And what we're gonna see.
Now it's the
Yeah.
Betty Ann Buchan's house.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And that was dismantled. This is behind the store. This is Fred Braun and the Wenz family, we think.
Philip Wenz and his
Yeah.
Clara the wife
Clara.
standing in the doorway, working on a boat in the back of the old
Here,
store.
there's a couple of little boat shops along the river, as you'll see. This one's is this one still here?
No, this was
Yeah,
the back of
yeah.
the old
Okay,
store that was
okay,
torn down.
Okay. There's,
This is in the Buchan's backyard.
another boat yard,
So this
boat shop.
boat shop is in the Buchan's Cove, and it's no longer there, but little Ian Buchan, Ian and Betty Ann's son, and I used to spend hours in the mud flats finding, we couldn't figure out what is all this stuff from, bottles and hardware and trash from a long time ago, but to us was treasure. And it was this guy tossing it out the window, apparently.
This is Sam Ward, working on his boat, and with the help of Stanley Jack, who we will also
We'll see
see a
later.
little bit.
This I love because you can just make out the Carlton Bridge in the background. It's a little
Yeah,
overexposed, but and Sam with his pipe, and then young Stanley Jack who was about 18. He was a senior at Morse High School.
maybe you have his pipe.
I probably found at least some of his pipes, yes. It does look like,
Yeah, yeah,
you got some,
yeah. Okay.
and because you
Yeah.
played there too,
Yeah.
didn't you, Howie? Yeah, it's a Days Ferry child thing. If you Forester children haven't done it, I'm gonna make you, sorry. We're gonna get down there.
So Days Ferry residents like to play with fire. This is actually just burning some brush. This is Fred Braun and Philip Wenz, and their wives are looking on, hoping that that's as far as it goes.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
and adding to yes, that's what.
when everyone's house is a tinderbox because they're 200 years old, this is a pretty brave thing. to do,
Make
but
me, yes.
bonfires are still community events. We all get together with a couple beers and catch up.
And water.
So here's Ken Martin's house. Again, it was white back then. And coming down the road is Duncan McIntosh, the milkman. His dairy farm was at 546 River Road, more recently known as Victor Knight's farm. Howard wrote that Duncan never kept records on deliveries. He simply relied on honesty of his customers. And there's Dora Kirkpatrick, Howard's mom, bringing out empty bottles. And I didn't know, Howie, that your parents' house was called Edgewater. It had a name. So they were fancy back then. They named their house. We should bring that back. We should bring that back. And there's Duncan skipping down to,
Yeah.
I think he was
I think-
self-conscious about being
I think he
filmed.
knew he was on the movies.
Yeah. And there he is
There
driving
he goes.
past Rick and Lori's house.
And the church shows up prominently in a bunch of different places. This was a congregational church built in 1833 by John Perkins, built by local subscription and also rented pews. They often shared ministers with Nequasit, and I think for a time shared with North Woolwich.
Yeah.
And this strikes me as a scene that I've seen 100 times, right? Coming out of that same.
Well, we
door.
have watched this
Yeah.
movie.
Well, I know. We have. That's why it feels so familiar. Yeah.
You should
Yeah.
know this by
Yeah.
heart now. I will.
Yeah,
remember
okay,
when she
okay,
comes up,
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
but you can talk about Josiah if you want. or not.
Well, when does she, let's see. Is that familiar?
Does it still stick? It does still stick, doesn't it? Okay. I think that might be Fred Braun with the cigarette, and you don't smoke in there anymore, right? Okay. And the white-haired gentleman is Captain Josiah Reed, and he founded Reed and Reed with his son Carlton Senior. We'll see more
You'll
of
see
him.
more of him, yeah.
There's actually some lovely footage of him with his grandson. So here's Dora Kirkpatrick, Howard's mom, with the light hat and the fur coat coming out. And here she is speaking with Mr. Perkins, who built the church, we think, and also built some other homes, which we'll see later. He lived at 181 and Fairbanks House. 181 was Bobby and Warren Johnson's house when I was a kid. That's Wendy Sinton's parents. Here's Mr. Perkins. Here's Dora again. And I just want to share about Dora, some stuff Howie shared with me about his grandmother. She was quite the lady. She grew up in Bath on Washington Street in her father's house, which is also where Howard grew up until they moved to Days Ferry, Howard Senior. They were next to York Hall. And she went to New York City to study opera. And I think she met her husband, Sam Kirkpatrick, there, bringing him back to Bath. She was the second woman in Bath to have a driver's license. And she used to drive her father around to collect rent from several properties that he owned. Upon his passing, Dora purchased the property at Commercial Street, incorporated the family business, Bath Fuel Company, in 1937. So she's
Quite prominent.
And her husband passed away in 1942, and she continued to run the business. So he was noted as the president in the census info, but she was clearly the lady behind the man.
More people coming out.
More people coming out of church.
Church.
There's Suzelle Howard. She lived in the Forester's house.
Directing everyone.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite images. This is Captain Josiah Reed with his grandson Guy. And as Amanda noted, he's one half of Reed and Reed, the other half being his son Carlton. And I just love that.
Guy skipping up the road. Ernie
Savage, the Reverend.
And Reverend Charles Brown.
Yep.
Yep, Reverend Charles Brown hanging out with Ernie Savage. Ernie lived in a house that is no longer there, but it was at Ben Hunter's, where Ben Hunter's house is now.
Herb Munsey backing up. We left a lot of car stuff in here because it's cool.
It's cool.
It's cool. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
more.
This is the community club now. It was the Days Ferry School, one of several one-room schoolhouses in Woolwich. This one was built in 1808 for $516.18. It was in continuous use until 1950, when students first moved to the Nequasit School, which is over and the other side of Route 1 on Barley Neck Road, and then to Woolwich Central School in the mid-50s. The community club purchased the school in 1951, and the Days Ferry Community Club, where I think there are several members here, actually started in 1928.
Yeah, and they held the community club meetings also at Tuesek Hall, which we saw earlier, until they purchased the schoolhouse. And here we are going past the old church again.
will be back at the church again.
Yeah. To the left of the church is 46 Old Stage Road, now the home of Greg and Susan Doak. In 1939, 71-year-old Cleve Buck lived there with his sister Charlotte. They never married. And Cleve had been a blacksmith like his brother Sam, who lived down at the corner at 15. Their grandfather, Dr. Cleveland Buck, came to Days Ferry in 1816 and initially lived at what is now my house, 14 Old Stage Road, in an addition that was built for him. Then he got married and moved out of the house and built this home, built Greg and Susan's home. His son, Samuel Buck, father to young Cleve and young Samuel the blacksmith, also became a doctor. And I mention him because Dr. Samuel Buck's medical instruments are on display at the Woolwich Historical Society, along with a picture of him. And I think that's thanks to Gordon Struble. I think he, your name's on it, Gordon. Gordon.
Better or for worse. I want to hire that guy.
So back on River Road. So this is my house. This is where I was living. This is Carl Pinson's house and Ann Pearson's house and Mary and Francis's house. This is Ernie Savage walking down River Road. You can see it's narrower, it's dirt, and he's not worried at all about being hit by some guy coming home from BIW. That's how it looks now.
I know, right? Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
Here
This
is 170 River Road. It's Steve and Sarah Griffey's house now. And at one point, it was the post office for Woolwich Village, Days Ferry. Another brick house is painted white. And in 1939, it was the home of Carlton Day Reed Sr.'s family. Carlton Sr., as we mentioned before, co-founded Reed and Reed Construction with his father, Captain Josiah Reed. Carlton Day Reed Jr., who we also know as Bud Reed, we all know, grew up in this house with his 3 sisters.
Now moving across the street to a house now owned by Stephen and Gretchen Burgle. This was Albion Corliss's house in 1939, but this was where John Corliss started his pottery place. He had apprenticed with a local potter in Yarmouth, moved to Bath, served with Bennett's Pottery, and then set up his own shop in 1824. That is Albion's wife, Olivia, working really hard to get a drink of water. And then look, and just boom. Yeah, we're done. This is
Al
this is Al.
Corliss.
Yeah.
This is Al Corliss with his son-in-law, Nick Carter. But Al was a machinist foreman at BIW, not a potter anymore. Just up the road and on the left is 200 River Road, Bud and Betty Reed's house, and now their youngest daughter, Mary Reed Fitzgerald's house. This house was built in 1884 by John Perkins, the older gentleman we saw at the church earlier, who lived in Anne Fairbank's house. He built it for Captain Edwin O'Day. Captain Day's daughter, Mary, and her husband, Captain Josiah Reed, made it their home in 1928. Josiah and their son, Carlton, founded Reed and Reed, as we said. In 1939, Josiah and Mary still lived in the house with Mary's sister, Lois. In 1985, Bud Reed and his wife, Betty, their grandson, restored the house and made it their home. In this footage, Loring Mayberry, who was feeding the ducks with his family earlier, is dragging a shy Winship Reed, who went by Wink or Winky. You can see the Woods house here in their barn, and Paula Harvard's house across the street. But Wink and his son Guy Reed lived in the big house with Wink's parents and Aunt Lois. Guy's mother had passed away days after his birth, and so they lived with the grandparents in the big family house. And little Guy was the cute guy we saw skipping up the road with his grandfather, and we'll see him again in a second. And here's Guy with Josiah Reed playing with the dog. This is Sam Ward, and I'll pause it here so you can see, here's the Coffin's house, now my house. Sam Ward he had the boat shop in the Buckins Cove, and he's driving his Model A Ford down the road from his boat shop. There he is.
With a pipe.
And Sam lived at 201 River Road, which is now the home of former Woolwich Historical Society President Debbie Locke and her dog Mickey. Mabel Jack also lived there and was listed as a housekeeper, and her son Stanley lived there too as a boarder. Here's Stanley jogging up in his Morse sweatshirt number 20. He was a senior, he was about 18 at the time. He later served on a submarine in World War II and became a local electrician. And here's his mother walking up the driveway with Lauren Mayberry. Stanley again checking out Sam Ward's Model A Ford in their driveway. Next is 203 River Road, the old Isaac Smith home built in 1859, now Stephen Gladdy DeWick's house. In 1939, it was the home of Herbert and Evelyn Munsey and their son Elton. Herb was a meat cutter at a meat packing plant and a longtime president of the Days Ferry Community Club. The first meeting of the community club was held in his house in 1928. Next door is 209 Paula Harvard's house, built in the 1880s for Captain Josiah Carter. In 1939, his grandson Clarence Preble was living there, and Clarence was a welder at the shipyard. And next to that is 213 Vince and Gwen Chateau's house, built in 1856 by Samuel Gahan. Vince was on the board of the Woolwich Historical Society for a time. Across the street is 208 River Road, Dan and Linda Wood's house, built in 1854 by William Preble. It was unoccupied in 1939 and owned by the town, and they've fixed it up quite a bit. Here's 221 River Road, now Dan and Katie Keller's house, most recently Laura Ann Lynch Lee's house. It was known as the Edward Crocker Homestead, and in 1939 it was the home of Al and Gladys Richards. An old newspaper article says they remodeled an L or a shed and opened a store there in 1945, selling general groceries and meats. Gladys tended the store during the day, and Al tended the store after his workday at BIW, where he was a welder. And Laura Ann and her husband have added on to it significantly. But the chimney's still there. So next is 232 River Road, most recently Rosemary Campbell's home. The Campbells raised their family here. Sadly, it was torn down, but the barn is still there and it's being well cared for. In 1939, it was owned by Albert Ames, who ran a farm and sold milk. We had lots of milkmen.
Yeah, this is also one of my favorite pictures. That is Jenny Maines finishing a day of teaching at Nequasit school and going home up the Days Ferry Road. I love the fact that her car also passed her by. This is Riverside Cemetery.
The guy driving the car was Allie Richards.
Oh,
Al Richards, so
okay.
Yeah,
who lived in Laura Ann's house.
yeah.
Okay.
And had the grocery store.
Huh.
Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah.
So next is 406 River Road, also known as Pine Saw Farm, now owned by Robert and Kimberly Goodspeed. This is what it looks like now. And the Woolwich Historical Society has farm equipment on display from this farm. Here we see George Walker and his daughter Maxine Boyd raking while George's wife stands in the door. The cat running around. with
Trying
them.
to help, but not really. Okay, this is what most recently is the Night Farm. And this is the home, if you remember, the milkman in Days Ferry,
Duncan
Duncan McIntosh. And you also, and his wife Edna. That actually doesn't look that much different
It
from when
doesn't,
I
just
first
a little overgrown.
moved here 40 years ago.
There's Edna with
Anyway.
a dog.
Farm things, and this is, I've never seen corn this high in Maine, I have to say.
And I think
this-
maybe Howard hadn't either
Yeah.
because I had to crop a lot of footage of that corn.
Yes, because
You'd
there
have
were-
been sitting for the next 5
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
watching corn.
yeah, yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah. But look at that. And this is Duncan, and soon you'll see his farmhand, Cliff Guptill,
There's Cliff.
cutting.
Cliff and his
Yeah.
wife lived at the farm until they owned their own house later. So back south of the village, we're on Route 127 again. We're about to see, I went and tried to stand on the same rock and I did not get hit, but you can't see the house anymore because of the trees. But this is 324 Middle Road, now Josh and Nikki Wright's house. I don't know if people may remember the Lagners, Dick and Ellie Lagner, but they lived in this house for a great time before they moved down to the river and built a house. In 1939, it was the Trot Farm. And here's Mrs. Hattie Trot handing bottles of milk to Loring Mayberry, posing for the camera. And Mr. Alfred Trot with a pitchfork and farmhand Rodney Tarbox in the door of the barn. Rodney lived with them. This barn's no longer there, it was up by the road.
All right, so now we come to smoke
Back to
eaters,
fire.
back to fire. This was a big preoccupation of Days Ferry people. This was we think is a controlled burn. Burning the field between Tuestic Hall, the Althouses house and Old Stage Road. And it was, it's common to burn fields. I think it was also a community event here. Those are called Indian pumps, and they were, you either carried them in your hand or you put them on your back. That's Captain Josiah Reed. And you'll see some of the it makes me a little nervous being so close to the house, frankly.
The very old houses.
Yeah.
We don't do this.
You don't do this anymore?
Bud Reed when I was a child, I remember seeing black fields at Bud Reed's and my parents explained to me he's doing it intentionally to burn off the old grass so that the new grass can grow up green and thrive. And my dad said it's the grass grows from the roots underground. And so the grass isn't killed. You're just burning off the old growth, like a haircut, but with fire.
I think this was just fun for you guys to do this. Yeah.
There's Winky
Yeah.
Reed, Guy Reed's dad.
So there were elements of control here. There's a guy.
Very professional.
And there's another one coming up, not just the blanket, but a broom could also be.
Yes.
handy. Yeah.
And that's Mr. Perkins, the old man, keeping an eye on the youngsters. See the Kennebec and the Carlton
yeah.
Bridge in the background.
Ladies overseeing, they're smarter than. So it's really pretty remarkable footage, I think.
It's a lot of
Yeah,
smoke.
yeah. Yeah. Smoke eaters.
That's why that's the Indian pump Stanley Jacks using. So next, the Longfellows have a well drilled at their house. Now at Bruce and Nancy Montgomery's house, the house I grew up in, electricity had just come to Days Ferry in the 1930s, making deep wells with electric pumps an option. Mr. Longfellow boasted to my parents when they bought the house from him that this was the very first drilled well in Saginaw County. And that must be why Howard was excited to film it.
Because there was a lot of footage of this too.
And there's the Coffin's house in the background and Grape Arbor and.
So how deep is,
They have a new well. I don't know how deep that one was, but they had 4 daughters all showering and drew down the level. And they got a new well drilled.
I think
when I was a kid.
this must be where they're cooling it off. That must be
Oh, maybe.
a water. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks, Howie.
Yeah.
And the plumb bob, presumably to check the depth, maybe. Oh, to see where the water is, yeah. So next up, the lighthouse service replaces and repaints buoys. And this buoy tender was called the Hibiscus. It was one of only 8 of its kind built in 1908 in New Jersey. And it was assigned to the first lighthouse district out of Portland, Maine. She was used to break ice in the Kennebec River from 1918 through World War II, although she was not built as an icebreaker. Her long boom that you see made it easier to transfer supplies to lighthouses and hard to reach rocks and cliffs. She had vertical flat sides to reduce the tendency of buoys from sliding under her as they pulled up to work on them. During World War II, she was reassigned to tend anti-submarine nets up in Newfoundland.
wow.
Yeah.
And there's presumably the captain walking up the deck. You
Oh,
see
there's the
bath in the background. Woolwich to the left, going down one of the cans. And here's another smaller tender going up to that number 6 nun that
Yeah.
we saw little Freddie Pittman running his boat around. And they're lifting it up so they can paint it. And this buoy's gone, of course, replaced by N number 8. We still have a red nun off of Days Ferry, but it's number 8 now.
Well, where is number 6?
There is not one. I
Really?
looked, the numbers are confusing. You have to pull up the
Yeah,
chart, but that's maybe another day we'll
Yeah.
we'll look into
next
that,
year's talk.
but next year's talk, where did number 6
Yeah.
go?
I know, right?
A lot fewer houses on the Bath side back then.
And this is the end of the first.
Well, almost,
reel,
there's a-
almost. Is it? Oh, right.
So
right.
here, this shows a view of, actually, I think from the point, I said from the river, but from the point, there's the old tavern. My parents' house is hiding behind this tree. There's Ryan Anderson's house and the Coffin's house, now my house. This was the Hilker's house, now Tom and Holly Mathis's house, Steve and Sarah Griffey's house. And Steve and Gladys DeWick's house and Bud and Betty Reed's house. And then this is the end of the
Yeah, yeah.
1939 footage. You can see the bridge in the background.
So 16 years later, we kind of moved back into the neighborhood, some new houses, ones that were not there in the 1930s. And same
sign.
number. And we have new signs here. This is Bud Reed and Richard Bisson and Harry Dutton building the new sign for Days Ferry. I think Dan Wood is to be thanked for fixing the most recent
recent.
one.
I'm sorry I didn't get
Um,
footage of you doing that, Dan. Next
Yeah,
time.
yeah, next sign you replace.
There's
And
Harry
again,
Dutton.
yeah, I mean, this is something that community did, right? We don't need,
You didn't hire this done. These guys, I
Yeah.
don't believe were paid to do this. They were just doing it to improve their community. And young Richard looks, I think, a lot like Rick. Good looking guy.
we are back to Days Ferry.
So again, we see Josh and Nikki Wright's house, 324 Middle Road. This is from the back side of it. Built in the late 1700s by Samuel Preble, who was a survivor of the Preble massacre of 1758, which is a topic for another presentation. In 1939, we saw the Trotts, Mrs. Trott with the bottles of milk and Mr. Trott with the pitchfork. In 1956, this was the von Hune house. They were from Germany. In 1941, Amy von Hune's husband was killed in Russia. And in a story that parallels The Sound of Music, she and her 5 children fled from their home in northern Germany to escape the Russian army instead of the Nazis, traveling country roads at night by horse and wagon, sometimes only 8 miles ahead of the ensuing Russians. They made it to the safety of the American zone in southern Germany, settling in a small village near Frankfurt. And the von Hunes eventually ended up in Days Ferry, living in this house. Her son Friedrich, who attended Bowdoin College, built this small cottage to live in with his wife Inga, but a hurricane blew it 6 feet from its location. So he had to start over. And he never did finish before he and Inga moved to Massachusetts with their children to pursue careers in music and instrument making.
Just like the Von Trapps.
Just like lots of music, right? And Nikki and Josh are trying to fix up the old cottage to be a studio, maybe still working. I know.
It looks great.
16 Preble Lane, formerly John and Peggy Chapman's home. Their daughter Elizabeth and her husband Spencer Gray now live there. It was built in the late 1700s by Jonathan Preble, who was an uncle to the survivors of the Preble massacre, which occurred, we think, on this property, but closer to the river out on a point. Must be in the fall.
Yeah. And then next up is 37 River Road, now Samuel and Elena Shaw. You can see them putting an addition on the house in the 1950s. Other recent owners of this house were Carl and Carol Gross, Tyler and Jamie Bisson Plord. And you can see here, Mrs. Rogers. It was
Betty Rogers.
Betty Rogers. You can see the milk bottle still on the porch. And John Rogers and Ernie Rogers displaying ducks that they've presumably harvested. Let's just see what that-
Nice meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
So just past Longley Drive, which I don't believe was there then, we see 57 River Road again, Maggie Leonard's house. And in 1956, it was owned by Wallace and Lanesta Ham. Here's Mr. Ham with his dog on the front porch. He was a clerk at the shipyard. I told you there would be puppies. And kittens.
This predates all the kitten videos on
This
the
is Mrs. Ham.
social media.
This is Lanesta Ham with her cats and kittens.
Oh.
Did she? Oh, you remember them?
Yeah.
No kidding. Siamese
Wow.
cats, right?
Wow. And this is now the where is it? It's now the Prescott Farm. This was built in the 50s. Here, as you can see, the Ed and Rissy Gallant. And we see the barn. I think I just saw that amazing fireplace or chimney.
This is Mr.
Delano.
Delano. He was the bricklayer for this chimney, standing
And-
by it proudly.
So Mrs. Ham had
And
kittens. Mrs. Gallant had
Had puppies.
puppies, which we'll see in a little bit here. Yeah. And horses, right?
And
Yeah.
horses.
Again, this is
This is
something that
Rissy
was
Ed.
commonly done. Yeah. And we. Yeah.
Oh, but touch.
Yeah. And now we see.
Do you know this guy?
Yeah.
Red cap? This is Howie, Howard's son. Getting some love from a puppy. Pretty cute guy. So 73 River Road, Susie Donovan's house now. It was still in the Wade family. Ed Wade had passed away 4 years prior, according to the records, but Howard's notes say his wife was still living there. We know this scary sharp road or sharp corner,
What year is this again?
1956 or 7, we're in now. And there's the Kennebec Lodge, the Mayberry's home, which later burned. Panning across Rick and Lori's field now. 122, Rick and Lori Bisson's home. And 121, Paul and Roxanne Althouse's home. Both were owned by the Pittman family at this time. I got it. Oh, right. Is it? No. All right. Dr.
All right.
Paul Pittman had a dentist practice that he ran out of this house. And in this shot, Dr.
Oh,
Pittman
yeah, love this.
is
Yeah. It's
about to light
directing
a-
his wife.
lighting a
Yeah.
cigarette while his wife mows the lawn.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And that's Richard and Betsy Bisson's house in the background.
Watch this little slick thing, how the handle goes back. Isn't that cool? So we now see, where are we? The Bissons.
Yep, Richard and
house.
Betsy Bisson's house.
Moving into, and what we see is they're moving into their new home.
Richard was just moving in with his family.
And now, and the baby Jennifer Bisson, now Jenny Rice, apparently Woolwich Central School's favorite bus driver. Yeah. And, oh,
This is 129 Charlotte Kirkpatrick's house.
which we've seen
We've
before.
seen before,
Yeah.
1939, this is where Howard Kirkpatrick lived with his father and mother, but in 1956, he lived there with his wife, Franny, and their 2-year-old son, Howie Jr., Howie who's here. It does look the same.
Yeah, it does.
does.
It does.
Howard Senior built a small white house next door where his mother Dora lived at this point. And after Franny passed away, Howard remarried Charlotte Kirkpatrick, and Charlotte still lives there and is active in the community club and the Days Ferry Congregational Church. She is a hoot. I love sitting with her. This is 135 River Road, now the Foresters, Bethany Atkins and Tim Forrester's house. In this footage, the Harry Dutton family lived there. It was later owned by Gordon and Ruth Fault. And these are the Dutton children waving, and Ben and Lily, you got off the hook. I was gonna make you recreate this video, but it was snowing, so you're welcome. Another time. Behind the house, in a moment, we'll see, this is Marthon Doak, Greg's father, Harry Dutton, Harry's wife, and Betty Doak, and little baby Randy Doak, in little overalls. There's Randy playing with ducklings. There's little boy Greg in the shorts, and Andrea with the thumb in her mouth. And I love this footage because my children have also played with ducklings with the Forrester children behind this very same house. And Ben and George like to put the ducks on their heads and call it duck hat and take pictures and send it to their mother and then ask us to wash their sweatshirts when they come home. And here's little boy Greg Doak pumping his little legs on the swing. Sweet little guy.
Yeah. There's again, horses and cars coexisting. This is Herb Munsey in a jigger wagon. And he's carrying his grandson and a friend.
Lucy Thorne,
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah, but we're gonna get to that.
It was tarred. It was not dirt anymore, but
Yeah.
it was
was,
not that
It's
it looks
not
much
bad.
better.
yeah,
It's wider, but
but so painting a line on that was a little sketchy. But as you'll see here, this is Ivan Shaw. Retarring, I got a lesson the other morning on how this works. It's liquid tar, pour it on, and then sand, and then the trucks that come after it kind of mix it by pushing it side to side. And then I think the truck in the back is carrying gravel, but basically the idea is that you mix it by moving it side to side, and then the grader comes along and smooths it out. And it provides, apparently earlier ways of right before grader would have been, they would sometimes drag trees down to sort of smooth it out. Yeah, yeah.
Jim Carter used to say that they would follow the roads, they'd love to get on their bikes and go riding down through the car and come back.
That's exactly, it was a
but their
big,
mothers love that.
it was a big hit for kids and dogs too.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's, yeah.
Here's 142 River Road again. This is Ken and Nancy Martin's home now. And next to it, 144 River Road. It was the home of Barbara Kurz, later owned by Hardy and Norma Rudolph. Ian and Betty Ann Buchan now own it. They live right next door, and they rent it as an Airbnb. Here we have 147 River Road. Now Erica Duramo and Matt Skinner's house, and David and Annie Miller's house for a time. It was still Marcia Stinson's home in 1956. The porch was gone by then. The front porch was gone. Matt and Erica live there now with 17 chickens and 4 cats. So we still have chickens and animals.
And
Here's Howie delivering the Sunday paper to Marcia.
Yeah, you give her paper on Sunday and I pick it up and she don't give me a third mile.
Do you still have them or have you lost them, Howie? You haven't lost them.
Maybe you'd like to donate them to the Historical Society. I love that. Is this 137? River Road is the Carter house now, and you'll see Eleanor Carter.
Well, it was Mason
sitting-
and Doris Carter's house at the time. They were raising their children there. Or it was
And we'll
still there.
see her reading a newspaper. Maybe she took it from her neighbor.
From Marcia.
From Marcia. And
Mike Carter with
nice,
a bicycle.
nice bicycle.
These are Jim Carter's siblings. Here's 6 Old Stage Road again, Carl Longfellow's house, my parents' house, Bruce and Nancy Montgomery. And the sunroom had been built by then. I think it wasn't in the 1939 footage. Here is 2 Old Stage Road, Larry Hobel and Diana Staring's house, the tavern. it was the home of Morris Smith in the 50s. And here's a view of Brick House Point, named because in the winter, the ferry went through the Narrows because the cove fills in with ice and you couldn't get to the landing. And so there, when I was a child, there was still a pile of bricks from the old house, and my oldest sister Sarah rode me out there once so we could explore the pile of bricks. I'm sure Jack Parker's gotten rid of them, but Jack and Susan have a beautiful house out there where they still live. And there's Larry and Diana's porch with the columns. On December 13th, 1957, the Esso tanker Thames lost steerage and grounded off what is now the Buckins Point. And where he is right now, there are two big rocks. And when I was a kid, little Ian and I used to swim out to them, and Ian called them Big Bird and Snuffy.
Oh.
I doubt that's what Howie called them when he swam out to them as a kid, but
We all came home on the bus one afternoon, and that was in the cove.
really,
Wow.
And those kids all went bananas.
that's the point now. You didn't go for a swim.
You know,
It was December.
I was an event every few weeks or so, the tankers would go to Gardner and take oil up there.
No kidding. So you go up to
Okay.
Gardner.
So they're going,
with oil.
okay, going into
At the
Dresden.
end of it there, big ships were bigger and the other transportation, they stopped using it.
Yeah.
You came around the corner and lost steerage, and that was in the cove because of the back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, supposedly, I guess your dad's note said that a BAW tug came to the rescue at high tide
Yep.
and pulled it off.
It won't be, I didn't tell you, that thing was like.
Yeah. Here you see Rick and Lori's boathouse in the foreground. They've fixed it up nicely now.
How long was that? How long was it on aground?
Well, just till high tide, right?
It was a little while.
This basically looks like it was weeks, you know?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's a long time between tides.
They shipped to you.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. So we're looking at Bath.
Thank God, yeah.
Oh, was it empty?
Oh.
Good, yeah. Now, did ships like this come to Bath Fuel Company, or did you get your fuel
No,
elsewhere by truck?
Long time. I was paying that property next door, they had garages.
Gotcha.
And so somebody mentioned that, you know, where's whose house and how long they've been here. This is Bud Reed building a house that now is owned by Michelle and Jamie Rhines.
He's building
The foundation
Foundation.
forms. There it is there.
so that's the completed house. And next to it, was recently the Hilliker's house. Howard Whittam was living here. He was floating. Remember the floaty Whittam, the lady hanging laundry.
It's her son.
And this was her son
Yeah.
living here. And I just pause it here because this house was built in Westport Island and was floated up here and placed in that location. And that's where Floaty's son was living.
What's the address of that?
It's Tom and Holly Mathis's house. It's right next to Steve and Sarah Griffey's house.
We can show it to you.
Yeah. And that's how it looks today. And there's Bud and Betty Reed's house up in the field. And across, just across River Road is 14 Old Stage Road. Most recently, Dick and Nancy Coffin's house for 40 years. And now the Dr. Ron and Amanda Martin home. We're not that fancy. Anyway, in 1956, it was the home of Brian and Frances Jewett. Here they are with their granddaughter Sharon. Mr. Jewett was a vaudeville actor as a young man, then a production manager at the shipyard, and finally the chairman of the Maine Highway Safety Committee. Howard's note said he was also a judge, but I didn't find any evidence of that in his obituary, but he may have also been a judge.
That's what we were told when we were all called over the house.
Sorry, Howie.
You get the pond across the street out from behind your old house and
Yeah.
jump off the loft into the piles of insulation. That they-
Oh, goodness.
Lovely.
Gave us out for that.
Yeah. This is thought to be the oldest house in Days Fair again, and here you can see, I think this is another one from the Historical Society collection that was sadly not dated, but anyway, so this is the location we're looking at now with the 1.5 story house. And as I mentioned, legend says that this house was built up around it. And if so, I think I've found evidence of that. Here's the dining room is here, and there's a fireplace and a chimney that goes up here. Right, my daughter's bedroom is here, right underneath the windowsills. The wall is thicker significantly on both sides of the house. And I'm wondering if that's where the roof line used to be. And Elliot Morse came over and he confirmed he thinks the same. When the Days bought the property, they lifted the roof and extended the house to the west to make it a colonial with a single chimney. And then when Dr. Cleveland Buck came to town in 1816, they extended the house to the east, added a chimney, and he lived there until he got married and built the Dokes house. And I share this picture also because the people staying in front are descendants from Samuel Harnden. Philip Harnden and his wife and his cousin Andy. Philip came from Tennessee and Andy came from Canada to visit the Historical Society. And when I found out, I invited them to come see the old house. And so that's them standing in front of or what used to be part of which was their ancestors' house. And then across on the south side of Old Stage Road is 15 Old Stage Road, Ryan Anderson's house. They'd just gotten a new picture window in the 1950s. This had been Sam Buck's house in 1939. And here you can see the old barn that's no longer there and Sam Buck's blacksmith shop here. And supposedly Marcia Stinson remembered seeing an ox in slings being shod, I think she said, in the old blacksmith shop. In the 50s, it was Carl and Lil Pinson's house. And Carl knocked down the barn and the blacksmith shop and built an attached garage that is there now. There's my old garage. It's about to fall down. And these kids running across the Jewett's yard are Howie Kirkpatrick, Andrea, and Greg Doak. And I love in Days Ferry, everyone's kids run across each other's yards. We don't have a lot of fences, and if we do, you jump them. And we love that about the area.
Were you running to get in trouble by the judge, the so-called judge?
Wasn't old enough just yet.
Yeah.
He's 9 still. So this is Carl Pinson's boat that they're pushing out of the barn. There's Carl and Lil Pinson. Carl worked at BIW. He held positions from molding loft to director of estimating. And my father actually worked for a ship, but was his counterpart at some
There's another pipe.
contract negotiations. Here's Lil Pinson. She was a 3rd grade teacher at Bath schools, Brunswick schools, and at Woolwich Central School. And here, Howie, Andrea, and Greg are helping sand the bottom.
This is a real Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer moment, I think.
Greg was a
Yeah.
wiggly guy,
Yeah.
wasn't he?
Yeah. Great.
I don't think that'll fit in the garage now, will it?
All right, so now this is roofing. Another community project is to roof the community club. The guy on the ladder is Herb Munsey, and people on the roof are Buddy Reed,
Bud Reed and Carl Pinson.
Pinson. You also see coming up.
Yeah.
Carol Morse.
This is Elliot Morse's father, Carol Morse. There's Herb Munsey with a cigarette supervising.
They really like smoke.
Howard Whittam.
Yeah, Howard Whittam on the ladder. Looks
Who
like he's
lives
been
in
doing
Helpers.
some painting. And there's Dick
Dick
Campbell.
Painting with a pipe in his mouth.
All these pipes.
You can't paint without a pipe. And Holly Bisson Lowe, who spearheaded much of the updating this fall, she was pulling off shingles, which then Randy Howell and Brian Bowers and Greg Doak replaced this fall. She is not smoking a pipe nor a cigarette.
She still has her apron on.
Yeah,
She
yeah, I
does,
know,
yeah.
I know, yeah. That's Mrs. Pinson and Mrs.
Campbell.
Campbell. And then inside all this activity and playing Beano,
Yeah, they held social events, including this Beano game.
They also played charades.
Carl Pinson enjoyed being the caller, and I remember getting a kick out of him doing the calling when I was a kid, because that was the first time I'd ever heard the joke, before I announce this next number, know that it's not before, and all the kids would get disappointed who'd had before. And we still have the old Beano game in the closet, and we will pull it out next Saturday for a Beano game or bingo game. Another favorite neighborhood event was ice skating, and it still is. On the Frog Pond next to the Jewett's house, then the Coffin's house, now my house. You can see Greg and Susan Doak's house there. It wasn't as overgrown. This is Carl Pinson skating by in the green jacket. And skating is still a popular event. You can just see through the trees of the church. Here, Tim Forrester is pulling Laura Ann's children in a sled. We still do that. In all ages, abilities, everyone comes out. It's just an excuse to hang out with your neighbors and try not to get cold. Here's Howie getting a skating lesson from Walter Burke. Now here's Bud Reed. He was a bit of a ringer, having captained the Colby College hockey team. His son, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren still play hockey on the pond with us neighbors. We have a few ringers of our own. This is our neighbor, Steve Griffey, fighting for the puck with my son, George Newcomb. Here's Cam Griffey. And Greg Doak's grandchildren, Darius's sons Mitchell and Nathaniel, my daughter Elizabeth. And I think, actually, Janet, I think that's your son, Cato, in the background. I think he was there that day.
Mike used to say to us, take your hockey sticks, and if you can get the puck away from me, he said, you'll be doing quite a job.
Yeah.
Like we weren't even there.
That's how you learn fast. I included this photo because I love it. Now a grandfather, Greg Doak, has been known to pull out his old skates, and they are old. And he still joins in the fun. Not a lot. He's not fighting for the puck, but he gets out there on the ice once in a great while. And there's the gang.
Team. So we're back to the church, and in the 1950s, there were weddings there. The first one we'll see is Hopesville Reed and Ed Hunter's wedding, and several of the neighborhood folks are there. Bud's wife Betty is not yet here. I love the little girl in the light blue dress was me 3 years later in a dress that did the same thing. I don't know what it was about 5-year-olds and weddings with dresses that kept blowing up.
So there's Dick Campbell coming out with the bow tie. There's Carl Pinson with the red hair. We trimmed a lot of this also. And here we have Betty Reed, who was a bridesmaid in her sister-in-law Hopi's wedding. This is Marcia Stinson, Lil and Carl Pinson. There's Betty facing the camera. And there's Bud Reed holding the hand of, I think that was little Hopestill Reed. And
No,
here's
this is Susan.
This is
Susan, who's
Susan Reed Parker, whose husband Jack now runs Reed and Reed. This was the organist Esther. She lived at what's Randy Doak's house now. She's talking to Randy's father, Martha, on there. There's Bud and Betty and Rosemary Campbell.
And then the next wedding is Eleanor Carter. You saw her on the front porch reading the newspaper. She's marrying Jack Spear.
And he planted on her. Go Jack. Tangled in her veil.
Yeah, yeah.
We drive those old Buicks around the back field.
Oh, yeah.
Mason kept them from Montgomery.
Oh, yeah.
They're beautiful cars.
Here's Jim Carter with the dark tie coming out the door. This is his big sister Eleanor getting married.
This is the minister trying to remember what date it is. I know, what did I just do, right?
There's the community club in the background and the neighbors gathering to decorate the car of the newlyweds.
It looks like a motorcade. It doesn't look like it's more than just the bride and groom running off.
Well, they're heading off to the reception. The old schoolhouse. There they
I
go.
think they're beautiful. You drove those in a field?
Back where the field was.
Yeah, yeah. Wow,
Mason had 4 or 5 cars.
that's great. Who cares in the field?
We need to mic this guy.
Yeah,
Gotta get Howie up here. Next time.
There's a story with every one of them.
I know.
You know,
I'll call you for next year's presentation. So back up to, up River Road is 208 River Road. It was the Bowers home, now Dan and Linda Wood's house. And Fred Bowers was a ham radio operator. There was a ham radio room in my house.
Yeah,
Yeah, in my parents. This is Blanche, Blanche Bowers with her African violets. I
In
think the
woods-
woods still
in the
have that
house.
wallpaper, don't
wallpaper?
you? Isn't that? So 203 River Road was Herb Munsey's home in 1957, now the home of Steve and Gladys DeWick. You can see 209 River Road, Paula Harvard's house behind it, followed by 213 Vince and Gwen Shadow's house. And then you'll see Howie hanging out in his red cap. And then 201 River Road, Debbie Locks was Stanley Jacks. He was living there. He was a grown man by then, and he lived there with his wife. He was an electrician. And coming down
and
the home
another
stretch.
cat.
Another cat. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
that's that.
I didn't either.
So here's Days Ferry viewed from the river, panning north to south. And there, actually, I think more trees now blocking some of the houses.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is the Rhines house and my house. Here's how it looks now from the river. And the old tavern, here's the dock and the Buckins Point. Sorry.
When the elm disease came through, they came down a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Now there's some gorgeous oaks along the river. That's from the
This is the
north and
picture
here's
we-
from the
we
south.
Started.
This is where we started and where we are today,
Sorta.
more or less. And that
And we're now
ends
leaving
our-
Days Ferry.
So thank you for joining us on our tour.